Okay, everybody, welcome back. I am now going to talk about Alone. Hopefully it won't be as long as Still, but I make no promises. So I'm going to give the same uh, disclaimers in that I probably will miss things and not talk about absolutely everything, but I'm just going to talk about whatever comes to mind and especially any new things. And, if I miss anything, feel free to send it in as an ask and I will go over it. So here's the thing. We started, or well, what I talked about in Still, if you haven't watched the Still video, go watch that first because I'm going to reference back to that and you will understand if you haven't seen it. But I talked about how that video, or that episode, I should say, it was really more about healing than it was about romance. And in order for there to be the foundation for a really healthy romance, they needed to heal their trauma. And I will say that, I mean, most human beings have trauma of some kind, and most of them are in relationships. So it's not that you need to always heal all of your trauma before you can be in a relationship, because that would be unrealistic. But in terms of the Walking Dead symbolism and the psychology of it, and just the fact that this isn't small trauma, this isn't like, my teacher once yelled at me and hurt my feelings, and I mean, we're talking The Walking Dead here, right? We're talking about seeing people you love die all the time and often being like ripped apart by monsters. I mean, this is massive, massive trauma. So anyway, the Still was more about healing trauma, and I think Alone is where we finally move into the romance of it. But then we also have this parallel arc that is Maggie, Sasha, Bob. And I don't know if you guys wanted me to go over that or if you wanted me to stick to the Beth and Daryl stuff, but I am going to go over it, not in tons of detail, but I think it's valuable to go over it because there are parallels here. And it's not a coincidence or an accident that this is the arc that they were putting side by side with Beth and Daryl in this episode. So let's just go ahead and get started. We start out with Bob being alone on the road. Now, I feel like they go out of their way to parallel Bob with Beth here. It just to me is very obvious that they're trying to show us that Bob is the Beth proxy or the Beth parallel here, okay? One of the first things I noticed that I'd never really thought about before is that he's carrying a machete. And we see it several times. It's obviously just his weapon that he uses to kill walkers. And no, Beth does not have a machete, but we do think that she may be the person in the red machete, and that could be a thing. So it's interesting that he has a machete. So this is another one of those that it's hard because it's a screenshot, but really the camera is moving across the woods and he's sitting right here, and it's much easier to see when the camera is moving. But what occurred to me here is that this is actually a parallel shot to Inmates, because we actually see something very similar where we see, the camera moving through the woods and kind of like in the distance, Beth and Daryl are running. And so I do think that that's meant to be a parallel shot. Then we have this shot. He is hiding behind a tree while walkers go behind him, and he's just hiding, waiting for them to pass. Remember, I told you in this Still episode to pay attention to that and remember that when she's hiding behind the tree and the walkers pass, and then of course Daryl comes up behind her. But again, it's a parallel shot. Okay, they are trying to show us Bob in the place of Beth here. There's another one. Okay, then it shows his shoes. It shows him walking. Okay, we've seen this more than once, and I actually would have thought that this just harkened back to Inmates again, because we do see this with Beth's boots in Inmates. But actually, I forgot until I was going through this that we actually see it in this episode too, and I'll show you where. When she's with Daryl, it does show her walking in her boots. We see that multiple times. So it's important as a parallel. The other person we see that with is Rick, right before he goes where? Into the CRM. How interesting. There's a better shot of the machete. Now we have this little place where he stays. It's a very unflattering shot of Bob. Some of the screenshots are unflattering. I really do think that this is meant to be a parallel with the Moonshine Shack. And honestly, I think this is like a mine opening. This looks like the opening to a mine to me. But anyway, he taps on it the same way, Daryl does when they get to the funeral home. And then he pulls this, I don't know what this is, this metal fence sort of thing across and ties it so that walkers can't get in and he's safe. But the biggest clue is that he's drinking this cough syrup. And then we see him being pretty drunk, right? Pretty wasted. So he goes to this place and he gets drunk. So I do think that this is meant to be a parallel to the Moonshine Shack. Then we see him on top of this trailer. I did notice he's carrying a bag a lot like Beth's. Now, of course, it's not black, but it's the same style. And actually later in the episode, when he's with Sasha, his bag is black, just like Beth's, and same style. He's waiting for walkers to pass here and resting. This isn't really like a crucifixion pose, like his feet would need to be together for that, and his arms more straight out. But even so, it's kind of what it made me think of. Got toilet paper here as a symbol. But this is, of course, where he meets Daryl and Glenn, and they bring him into the community. We have at various times tried to, think about this as being, Beth wandering by herself and then being found. And I do think it could be that, but I think it's more complex than that as well. The episode is called Alone, and the operative theme here is that it's not good to be alone and that you should be with people. And so I think it has more to do with that. And that, I do think that there are parallels between that and Beth, but I'm not sure that the point of this was that Beth is going to be wandering alone by herself and Daryl's going to find her on the road. I mean, like that might be true symbolically, but probably not as literally as we originally thought when we were watching. He says it doesn't matter who you are. And that plays into the same theme that, like, at this point, he just wants to be with people. He doesn't even really care who they are. And that obviously surprises them. But he goes with them. Thankfully, he stumbled upon good people, not bad people. And then, we see him at the prison in the very first episode, 401. Okay, then we go to Maggie, Sasha, Bob in real time. And there's fog. And this was interesting because we've seen this in Daryl Dixon now. And I remember somebody telling me it was like the fog in Alone, and I was like, oh, light bulb moment, yeah. But really, I think, symbolically anyway, the fog represents them stumbling around without knowing what to do, like, symbolically not having visibility about what to do next, kind of a thing. And because they're searching for people and they don't know where they are, so they feel like they're blind, but it can also play into the blind theme that we talked about in Still. Now, this is kind of fun. She thinks Sasha thought he got bitten, and he kind of did, but it was just on the bandage, so it didn't break the skin, and so he's not really bitten, right? It just, one of them tried to bite him. So we have a representation of someone who seems to have been bitten, but there was a bandage, and he's fine. I mean, that just kind of feels a little bit like a Beth parallel if the bite cure theory ends up being true. But I mean, and from maybe a higher level too, she thought he was going to die, and then she's happy that he didn't, right? And she hugs him, and he says, I didn't say stop. He's flirting with her. So then we go to Beth and Daryl. And you guys, this is another thing that I know that filmmakers, or in this case, TV show makers, they do this. I mean, in the previous scene, it's very obvious that Bob was flirting with Sasha and that there's like a budding romance going on there, right? I mean, she hugged him and he literally said, hey, you don't have to stop hugging me. And he's grinning when he says it. Like, nobody's going to deny that that was flirtatious, right? And then they go to Beth and Daryl. And they, the show makers, they do this. They parallel or, intersperse scenes like that to show how one is like the other. So, I mean, that alone is evidence of the romance, no matter what the skeptics say. So, and then we have the signs are all there. You just got to know how to read them, which we've always thought was aimed at, I mean, TD wasn't a thing back when this aired, not until after Coda, but that's the writers telling us that you have to pay attention to the symbolism. And if you know how to read it, then you'll know what's going on. What are we tracking? All zigzaggy. It's a walker. Maybe it's a drunk. Pretty soon I won't need you at all. Yeah, keep tracking. So we all know this. This scene, I feel like I really recently dove into it when we were talking about season 4 stuff. And I talked about how this walker does seem like he was law enforcement because he has a gun and handcuffs on his belt and that sort of thing. And I talked about how maybe I do think he's a foreshadow of Grady. I know he's not wearing the actual cop uniform, so he may not be a Grady cop, actually in the show, but I feel like he's a symbolic foreshadow of Grady because he's law enforcement, which is a foreshadow of the Grady cops. And Beth steps in a trap, right? And she kind of stepped in a trap. And that's how she got taken to Grady. So I do feel like that's the case. So I don't need to go into that too much here other than that. Here we've got her black bag. We've got her green journal in her back pocket. She steps in the trap. It's eating a possum too, which suggests, if I'm right about the interpretation and this represents Grady and she's represented by the possum because like I talked about last video, possums play dead. It suggests that the Grady people were feeding on her in some way. And of course, that's not literal, but just that they were using her, and of course we know that, but it's just a foreshadow of that and maybe of more than we actually saw too. So we have Daryl takes care of it, gets her out of the small game trap, and then we go back to Maggie. Here we have them disagreeing. Maggie wants to go. Sasha wants to wait till the fog clears out, and Bob pretty much agrees with Sasha. He says, the plan's working, no need to get sloppy. And then Maggie notices that the compass is broken, and the compass, of course, is a pretty potent symbol of them. It's like their moral compass, or it's not really morality though. It's more like their, I don't know, logical decision making. Their compass is broken, right? And again, I feel like that's just because of the trauma, right? They're all dealing with trauma. Maggie's looking for Glenn. Sasha lost people too, and she's really freaked out about it. It's. I said that the last episode was about Beth and Daryl healing. This is about Sasha healing and Maggie to some extent too, in very much the same way as we'll see. So Sasha and Maggie are not very happy with each other because they want to do different things, but Bob is kind of trying to mediate. Okay, and so then we get them coming to the graveyard and the funeral home. I don't know that I have a ton more to say about the scene. It's one of everybody's favorites, of course. There's a serious reference, serious piggyback, so technically two of them. And he says, in a way, this is somewhat indicative of what I said. Well, okay, so maybe we should talk about this now. Daryl and Sasha are being paralleled here. So I said that they went out of their way to parallel Bob with Beth. And of course, his romance partner is Sasha, therefore Daryl is Sasha, but we're also seeing them paralleled in a lot of ways. And one way that, again, shows Daryl's, that he's still dealing with at least some trauma, even though he healed a lot of it, is that he's assuming that anyone they come across is going to be bad and he's going to have to kill them. And, it's because of how dangerous the world is, you should at least probably consider that as a possibility, but it's also a very negative way to think. And so, of course, Beth says, there are still good people. And he said, I don't think the good ones survive. Again, just showing his mindset. They stop at the grave and he puts the flowers on there and they hold hands, of course. And then we see Maggie, Sasha, Bob come to the terminus sign. Let's see, do I have anything here I need to go over? Just maybe the fact that Sasha she's immediately suspicious, right? She immediately doesn't want to go. There's the terminus map. There is one part where, or maybe I haven't hit it yet. He's saying Tyrese might be there. And she says, yeah, but basically it could be a trap. And maybe if Glenn saw one of these, he'd think the same thing. And she says, no, he wouldn't. He would believe. This is the part he says, I didn't capture all of the dialogue, but he says, do you want to keep making these circles from the bus? So remember, they were the ones that found the bus from the prison and all the walkers got out and they killed them all. So it sounds like they've literally been going in widening circles from the bus, searching for people. And that's not a bad plan, but it's also, it's like they're going in circles. That's literally what they're doing. And it's not very productive. Now, the idea is that if they follow the tracks, they'll be going to some place. They have a destination in mind and they can get on a linear path to it. Now, we know that Terminus doesn't end up being a very, very great place, but that's kind of what he's saying here. Do you want to keep doing these circles, or are you talking about doing something else? We're not splitting up. And then he says, should we take a vote? But she knows she's outvoted, so they go. But again, just to say that Sasha is a lot like Daryl. And in fact, this is why it's Daryl and Sasha and Maggie in Them who are the three that are having the hardest time, right? Because they're very similar. Not so much in their personalities, but like their outlook on the world. And they're also so angry and so prone to self-destructive thoughts that when they lose people, it's like they can't pull themselves out of it. All right, so they get to the house, they go in, it's so clean. They find this guy with the makeup on him, and Daryl's weirded out. And of course, this part where she says it's beautiful. Again, I know these are the lovely moments between Beth and Daryl, but I just don't have a ton to add to them. I do love his face. This is right after she says it's beautiful, and he makes this face like, really? I just think it's funny. But then when she explains why she thinks that, then suddenly he's kind of on board. All right, and then we have Sasha Bob again. Now, this is where he basically starts calling her out on the truth about why she's dragging her feet. So, at first he says, why do you want to stop? If you want to stop, just tell me why. And she says, well, so we don't get killed. And he goes, yeah, that's not it. And she gets all defensive about it. And he said, I don't think you even know why you want to stop. And she says, what happened this morning? She means with the walkers in the fog, we get warnings. And then she says, odds are Glenn's dead. And the thing is, it's one of these things where she's being pragmatic, and she's right that there is a good chance that Glenn is dead. But it's about whether, I don't know, there's kind of a continuum between being so optimistic that you're being unrealistic, or just, believing the best and moving forward and believing that, um, something might be true. And I do think that human beings have intuition and we get feelings. And so when Maggie believed that Glenn was alive, I don't think she was just believing that because she needed to believe that to move forward. I think she genuinely knew, in her heart that he was alive and she was right. But Sasha can't necessarily feel that, right? And so it's like, it's understandable. I mean, Sasha is being realistic and she's wrong, but that's not necessarily a failing on her part. But the problem is more just that she is giving into fear. Because it's one thing to say, okay, let's be realistic. Glenn might be dead and maybe we need to prepare Maggie for that. It's another thing to say, okay, we're not doing anything. We're stopping. We're not even looking. You see what I mean? Like, it's just different. So she's dealing with trauma in a lot the same way that Beth and Daryl were dealing with trauma in the previous episode. And much like Beth did with Daryl, Bob is just calling her out on it and saying, what's the real reason that you keep wanting to stop? I did notice that they mentioned these 6 bullets quite a few times. And it's because that really is all they have. So they're saying they're low on ammo. But they don't say they're low on ammo. They say they have 6 bullets. And I don't know what that leads to. I'm almost wondering if it might be something during the missing 17 days. Don't know for sure, but I did notice that they mentioned that multiple times, and that is quite specific. So she tells him that she wants to find a building and stay there. Then we move to the kitchen where we find our white trash brunch, which is fun. One thing that I noticed that I think I've noticed it before, but I haven't really registered it, is that there's a lot of baby food here. And the only reason that's interesting is because in season 6, we had when the wolves leave Alexandria and then a bunch of them attack Rick's RV. Remember, he finds those baby carrots in the pocket. And, there's a lot of possible reason for that. I mean, on a plot level, it tells Rick that they were just at Alexandria, and I think that's true. But symbolically, we can tie this to the wolves. And I honestly think that's what it is. It's another tie between Beth and the wolves because there's baby food here. And Beth is always taking care of children and babies. So I just noticed that this time there was a ton of baby food here. And that's interesting. And they never even mention it. Like, they mention diet soda and pig's feet, and you see the peanut butter and jelly, and then you see what's on the table when they actually eat. And the baby food is not mentioned, but it's there. You can see it quite plainly. All right, so the peanut butter and jelly, of course, we've done that before. That's a symbol. They're still good people. Pig's feet. And then we have this diamond too. We've always said Beth is the queen of diamonds, so there's that. He's putting up the alarm, and then we have her singing the song. He comes up behind her. People have found things here. This looks a little like a skull. I don't know. I haven't read too much into the background things. I'm not saying they aren't a thing, but they just don't jump out at me as like a smoking gun. But this is the song, We're Alone in Our Own World, that I mentioned for Still. The only way in is through the front door. That also feels like part of the front door, back door kind of theme. He gets in the coffin. And, I remember a long time ago, I think there were some fans who freaked out when this was on because they thought it was a foreshadow of Daryl's death, which I do understand why they thought that. He's in a coffin, But I think it was a foreshadow of his, like, psychological death, his emotional death when he lost Beth. Obviously it wasn't his physical death because he is still alive. It also could have been a foreshadow, people might say, of her death, but it wasn't her that was in the coffin. Honestly, if they wanted to foreshadow her death, I kind of think they would have put her in the coffin. And then I remember this somewhat inappropriate meme that said, because yes, we would have sex with Daryl Dixon in a coffin. I was like, well, that's morbid. Okay, moving on. Anyway, so keep singing. These are all lines that we're all very familiar with. I don't have a whole lot to add. There ain't no jukebox. And then she makes a funny face here. Like, she smiles and then her smile kind of leaves. Like, yeah, that really wasn't much of a compliment, Daryl. Anyway, so also a very fun moment between them. Then we go back to Sasha Bob, and they wake up and Maggie has taken off and says, don't risk your lives for me. Good luck. It's that luck again. And Bob wants to catch up to her. Now, this is where we actually get a little bit more. And again, this is something that their dialogue is so, I don't think elevated is the right word, but it's like they talk around things. So you really have to think about what they're saying to pull meaning out of it. She says he's happy. You've been grinning since we left the prison in one piece. If you're so happy to be alive, why are we walking into the heart of darkness? And by that she means terminus, like they're going somewhere that's unknown and they don't know if there might be evil people there. And so it doesn't make sense to her that he's so happy to be alive, but then he's willing to take this risk. And he says, well, it's not about me being alive. And she says, do you even know why you're smiling? And he says, oh yeah, it's because I'm not alone. So here is the theme that ties into the title, right? That's how it happened when I lost my first group and my second group, but I broke that streak, and you'd be smiling too. Self-awareness is a beautiful thing. And then he says, you're just as bullheaded as she is sometimes. So again, the real theme here is just that you need to be with people. And I think it's also that when they want to be alone, like Sasha is here or like Daryl is sometimes, it's because they're so deep in their trauma. And once they heal their trauma, then they want to be with people again. And that's kind of what they're trying to show. And we even see this later with Daryl. After he loses Rick, after like the 6-year time jump, he's been living alone, on his own, well, with the exception of the Leah time period, out in the woods. And Carol's really worried about him, but he shouldn't want to be out there alone. He should want to be with people, but he's so deep in his trauma that he's just closing in on himself, and that's kind of what we're seeing on a lesser level here with Sasha. All right, then we have the famous bridal carry scene. And we've got the peanut butter, the Diet Cola, lots of theories. The okra is green about these things. I'm not going to go into them too much. Here's the fleur-de-lis symbol in the background. Then they hear something, but it is just the doggy, the one-eyed doggy, which is also a serious symbol. He wouldn't come in. I told you to stay back. Maybe he'll come back around. This part with Sasha Bob, I didn't see a ton of stuff in, although he does talk about cicadas and owls. Cicadas are on a 7-year cycle. They go underground and then return. So that's a return symbol. Owls we've seen as a symbol other places, such as on Jesse's porch. I think sometimes they go in circles. There's the circular thing again. This part, he says he didn't sleep much when he was on his own out there because there's so much noise at night from the animals. And she says, you're not sleeping much now. You've got to heal, so you need to sleep. He lays down for a minute and says, okay, I tried. I'm still awake. And the only reason I think that's important is because both Daryl and Carol talk about how they don't sleep much. And it's because they're dealing with stuff and they're not very happy. So it's like people sleep better when they feel safe and when they've healed their trauma. When they haven't, it tends to keep them awake. So it's just more, showing what's going on here. Psychologically, she says, what the hell are we doing out here? And then he just asks her very directly, why do you think Tyrese is dead? And she says, what? And he says, if he were alive, he'd go for Terminus. I know you know that. So why do you think he's dead? Or are you just too afraid to find out if he is or not? And she doesn't answer. Like when she doesn't have an answer or any way to come back, she just kind of goes stony and doesn't answer. And he says, up till now, I thought you were the toughest person I ever met, which is kind of weird because you were the sweetest too. And then when she looks at him, he was like, I'm just saying. So again, he's flirting with her. We have the budding romance, but she is still being pretty closed off. Then we have the dinner, the thank you note, when they come back. For a long time, I mean, there's like 7 candles here, and we thought that maybe meant she was coming back in season 7, which it clearly didn't. But 7 is also the number of completion or perfection, so that could play into it. It's a biblical number. He wants to stay. We'll just make it work. They may be nuts, but maybe it'll be all right. She says, so you still think good people are around? What changed your mind? This is like, all of us know this scene. I don't have to go over this scene with you guys. It's kind of the ultimate romantic scene because it's basically him telling her he has feelings for her, which Norman confirmed very recently. So lots of people tried to say that wasn't what it was, and it was a brother-sister thing, which is ridiculous because it's a moonlight dinner, and that would be creepy if he saw her as a sister, and then this scene happened, right? But again, Norman confirmed it. Then the dog comes again. I'm going to talk in just a minute a little bit more about them staying and how I used to try to figure out these parallels. And I was going, okay, I know that there's a reason that we've got the Maggie Sasha Bob side by side with Beth and Daryl, but I would try to create these parallels and they just didn't work, right? I wasn't thinking about them right, but I think I have them nailed down a little bit more now, but let's go a little bit further. So of course he opens the door. There's walkers. He says, run. They come in. Beth, pry open a window, get your shit. She says, I'm not going to leave you. Go out, go up the road. I'll meet you there. Go. Okay. So then he goes into the basement. Now this is where we're going to get a little bit more. First of all, the basement is a very medical setting, right? They're not exactly gurneys. They're more like, not really slabs, but they're what the bodies are laid out on. But we have like medical machines in the background. Here, these are scissors. And I couldn't find the right shot, but I used to have a shot somewhere. It's probably buried on my computer somewhere. I'm pretty sure there are 8 sets of scissors lined up. I'm not positive that there's 8, but I think there are. And if there are, that points directly to 508, right? When Beth uses the scissors to stab Dawn. But even if I'm wrong about the number, I mean, I think there's other instruments here too besides scissors, so they're not all scissors, but I think like you got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I think there's 4 up here too. Anyway, they're still scissors, okay? So the medical setting, the bodies, and the scissors. I mean, it all points to Grady. And Daryl actually grabs scissors here and starts using them to stab the walkers in the head. I don't think very many people register that, but he is actually not using his knife, not using his crossbow. He's using scissors here, which clearly is a foreshadow of Grady, right? You've got something yellow over here. I think that's a box of gloves. And then we've got another, this is the same medical machine. I don't know what kind of medical machine this is, but it reminds me of the deep thrombosis machine that they use on Joan at Grady. Now, again, I'm not at all an expert in medical machines, so that might not be what it is, but it's just what it reminds me of. This is Daryl back here. You know, he's got the, he uses the, again, it's not a gurney. It's just, you know, the platform on wheels that they were putting bodies in, and he puts it between him and the walkers as a buffer. And then we see him use that, and then he gets behind this one and uses that. And I think that's important thematically, that he's using the medical setting as a shield. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Finally, he gets out, goes upstairs, gets out into the yard, running. And as you can see, I tried to lighten these because they're so dark, but they just kind of got pixelated. But here is where he's coming upon this walker. So he stops because he sees a walker, and it's this guy. Now, this is the one that basically we think bit Beth, because even though it's hard to see because this is all in shadow, and again, it's a screenshot issue, his mouth is covered in blood, and it looks very fresh, like he's drooling red blood. And if this was just a walker walking around, I mean, of course, most of them have eaten flesh at some point, but it shouldn't be that red and that dripping. It should be pretty dried out if he has not eaten a human very recently. It just seems like there's a lot of it. So that's why people feel like maybe he just bit somebody, and it might have been Beth on the arm. But of course, Daryl just takes him out. And then it's only a few steps behind that walker. He runs forward maybe 2, 3 paces, and he sees the bag. So again, it seems like Beth would have been with her bag, and this walker just bit someone. And then when Daryl comes upon him, you know, Daryl's not really thinking that. It doesn't really occur to him. But in hindsight, I mean, it didn't occur to anybody. Nobody thought Beth was bitten. We thought she was taken in the car, you know. But in hindsight, it does seem like she might have been. Then, of course, he sees the famous car, white cross, and he goes running after her. Okay, hold on. So what I will say about this is that I do think that the funeral home is definitely a foreshadow of Grady, obviously because of the medical setting. Even the bodies, like the fact that they had makeup on them, and that it feels like, even though you know Beth was seeing it as a good thing that whoever was doing that was honoring the dead, at the same time, the paint could be seen as a mask or something that was there was something hiding underneath that was not so good necessarily. But more than that, I was thinking about, think of it this way. We don't usually equate this, like Beth going missing here, with the missing 17 days, but I think we should. So if you think about it this way, telling her to go out the window and up the road could be synonymous with leaving her in a car somewhere. And then the fact that he uses the medical setting to buffer himself against walkers, I feel like that is very specific. And remember that it is my theory that Team Family in some way tried to lead a huge group of walkers away from something, like Operation Lead the Walkers Away. And that's how Rick knew how to do that, because they had done it at least somewhat successfully before, even if things didn't go very well. So I'm wondering if, you know, somehow those walkers that come in represent a horde of walkers during the missing 17 days, and somehow Grady became a buffer for them. You know, we've talked about how it says in that game, they have Rick say, the last time we were here, it was burning, and we didn't see that in the show. I mean, there's things that happen during the missing 17 days that we don't understand. And if this was a foreshadow for them, the reason we didn't pick up on it is because we haven't seen the missing 17 days yet, right? But I feel like that could be a thing. And then if you think about it this way, once Daryl finally gets out of there, away from the walkers, away from Grady, all of that, he goes to where he thinks Beth should be, and she's gone. And of course, in this case, it's not because she's dead or anything. She got kidnapped, you know, he knows she's in the car. But there are still parallels there, that she wasn't where she was supposed to be. And then he went searching for her, right? Which we think he did during the missing 17 days too. So I do feel like this is something of a foreshadow of what we haven't seen in the missing 17 days. But again, as with all things, it's hard to know exactly what it means because we haven't seen that footage yet. Then they see one of her signs she's keeping to the tracks, We see Daryl chasing her again. I always think it's interesting that this is a crossroads. I mean, from a purely logical standpoint, he stopped here because he didn't know which way she'd gone, unless there are actually tire tracks like rubber, because somebody squealed the tires. You can't tell on a paved road which way they would have gone, right? And they were hours and hours ahead of him, which means, the weather or walkers passing could have, you know, covered it anyway. But this also represents a psychological crossroads, right? Is he going to be able to find her? What's going to happen? And you notice that the tracks cover, go across the road here. They might actually go across this one too later on, just depending on the direction and winding of the road. But we don't know which way she went, like it doesn't show us. And so, we've often talked about how it seems like everyone else followed the tracks to Terminus, which suggests, maybe that would be this road, and Beth crossed over them, which might be this road. But again, we don't know that for sure. All right, so then we get to Sasha wanting to stop. And he says, I'm not stopping. She's out there alone. She says she didn't want us to come. And he says, it doesn't matter. She's alone. This is something he said about how when he was with the other groups, he would always think, okay, how long? The clock's ticking till I lose somebody again. So that represents the negative mindset of always thinking you're going to lose somebody, which is what is the mindset that they're all in, right? I mean, that really, when you shut down like this and it comes from trauma, it's all about fear. And their fears are totally justifiable. They have lost people. And so that's why it's a real leap of faith to be more optimistic and think, okay, we're going to work this out. We can figure it out and not always be living in the fear of losing someone. But that's what Sasha is doing here. That's what Daryl was doing before. That's what they all do. And then he says, bad things happened because I was scared, right? We saw Bob in season 4, getting alcohol, and Daryl was mad at him. But that's another way that they're paralleling Beth and Bob is the alcohol and the fact that they use that to run from their feelings, or they use that to comfort themselves when they were scared rather than dealing with their trauma, right? So we're just seeing a lot the same thing. And he said they didn't need to, meaning the bad things didn't need to happen. I didn't need to be afraid. Now, if we get to Terminus and Tyrese isn't there, that doesn't mean he's dead. And he says, you don't need to be afraid. And she says, I am not afraid. Okay, so here's how the parallels work between Sasha and Daryl. First of all, remember I told you in the still video that we're going to see that exact parallel is Beth said, you don't get to treat me like crap because I'm afraid. And he said, I ain't afraid of nothing. Different words, but the exact same thing is being said, right? And what I was saying before is that I would try to look at, Daryl versus Sasha here because I've always had a sense that they were paralleled, but it doesn't work out very well in this episode. So you could say on the one hand, they both wanted to stay somewhere. Sasha wanted to stay here. Daryl suggested staying at the funeral home. But those are actually two different things, even though, yes, I mean, technically they're the same and that they're both trying to stay somewhere. They're coming from completely different energies. So Sasha does not parallel to Daryl in this episode. She parallels to him in the previous episode. She is going through the exact same thing he went through, only he went through it in still. She wants to stop at this place because she's too afraid to move forward. With Daryl wanting to stay there with Beth, it's the opposite. He wants to stay there because he actually has worked through a lot of his trauma and he's willing to put down roots and create a life with her. So you have to understand that even though the action is the same, the reason behind it is completely opposite. I also think that, we actually see the romance budding here, they kiss. We didn't see that with Beth and Daryl, but it's just another parallel between them. Like I've said before, it's a budding romance while this is going on. And then she says, you don't have to be alone again. And I didn't get it, but he says, I won't be. And he means because he's going to go find Maggie. So Sasha comes up into this building and she starts to cry. And I actually think, it's very sad, but this is a really good representation of what it looks like when someone's trying to deal with trauma, because it's like, if you're that sad, just go with them. Obviously you don't want to be here alone, but that's what trauma does, is it makes people shut down. And she really doesn't know what to do because she's too afraid to move forward, but she doesn't want to be here alone. That's true. So it's really sad. She's trying to deal with this and she doesn't know how to deal with it. And that's just the nature of trauma. Then it shows this compass again. It's almost like it bookends Sasha's little journey here with the compass, showing that her trauma is getting in the way of her intuition. Okay, and her intuition is how she would make better decisions and be more brave when it comes to moving forward and searching for people. But she's got this broken compass because of the trauma she's been through. Then she sees Maggie out here. Now, Maggie lying with the walkers is interesting. What I thought of when I was watching it is that we actually see Sasha do this later in season 7, just before she dies. she spends a lot of time out in the woods alone, and a lot of times she's just killing walkers, and that too is her trauma after losing Abraham. Um, and I remember watching The Talking Dead after the episode where Sasha, because they're all dead walkers, just like they are here, and she lays down with them and shuts her eyes. And I remember on The Talking Dead they asked about that, and it was Yvette Nicole Brown, I couldn't think of her name for a minute, who was a notorious caroler. But she was, when they asked her about Sasha laying down with the walkers, she said that she found it peaceful. And I wasn't sure I entirely agreed with that interpretation. I mean, it was peaceful in the sense that it was quiet. And she laid down, and she was, Sasha at the time was dealing with so much trauma, and she was very angry, and she was always shooting guns and killing walkers. And it's like, that's got to be exhausting after a while. And so it was peaceful in the sense that she, laid down and was quiet. And so, of course, it was peaceful. But to me, that was a very clear representation of someone who was almost suicidal. And not that I think Sasha would take her own life just to take it. I mean, she did in that episode to try and save everybody, but she wouldn't just like decide to be suicidal and take her life for no reason. But again, just like it's not normal to want to be alone out in the woods away from everybody and anybody, it's also not normal to want to lay down in a coffin and die, or to lay down with walkers and die. So to me, that's just a sign that she's still very, very traumatized. And people just, they get to the point where they're in so much pain and there's so much on their shoulders that they just want oblivion. And like I'm not saying it's not realistic. It is for someone who's in that amount of pain, but it's not healthy. And we kind of see that with Maggie here. And I had never thought to connect those two things, and that maybe Sasha did that because she saw Maggie do this. Anyway, we have an ice cream truck here. Lots have been said about the ice cream truck, especially because of the Daryl's I never about frozen yogurt. But Sasha accidentally breaks the window. She runs out to help Maggie. Maggie gets this sign and starts killing him with it, which is pretty gnarly. And then Maggie says she was looking for another walker, as in to write another sign for Glenn. And she found more than she wanted to. She was lying there, and she says she remembered, I heard what you said back at the camp. And first she says something like she heard Sasha say she wanted to stop at a town. And then Sasha says, what else did you hear? And she says that odds are Glenn is dead and we should stop. And the thing about that is that actually kind of backs up what I was saying. If Maggie killed these walkers and then she started thinking about what Sasha said, that maybe Glenn is dead, and then she laid down with the walkers, that tells me that she had a moment of despair where she was thinking, what if Sasha's right and Glenn is dead? And she laid down with the walkers, which is really terribly tragic. But while she was there, she also kind of reversed that and came to an epiphany and said, but you're wrong. I'm not giving up. I think Glenn is alive. And then Sasha says, well, then why are you here if you're not giving up? And she says, because I was waiting for you. And that's actually very significant because Maggie took off on her own. And I said that this is mostly about Sasha, but we have Maggie healing from stuff too. I mean, her being surly and just searching for Glenn. And, maybe that's the answer, at least part of it, to why she doesn't search for Beth, because she really doesn't think Beth is alive. And the only thing she can do, much like Beth, is she wants to be busy doing something, and looking for Glenn is how she is running from her feelings and her grief and just making her feel like she's staying busy doing something. But she took off on her own and said, don't risk your life for me. And I can take care of myself, and I'm just going to go do this on my own. But that's not the healthiest way of doing things. And so after she had this epiphany, she was waiting for Sasha and Bob to catch up to her. And that's actually showing a lot of growth and a lot of progress, but it also feeds into that it's not good to be alone. So she chose to be alone, but that was actually the more destructive choice. And when she kind of had an epiphany about it, she was going to wait for them to catch up. And she says, I'm not giving up, but I need your help because I can't do it by myself. And even if I catch up to Bob, we can't do it alone. And I think this is actually really interesting, the way they bring this across. She says, I thought that I couldn't ask you to risk your life, but I can, because I know what you'd be risking it for, and it isn't just Glenn. And she means, it's everybody. It's finding everything. It's finding their family and maybe building a community again and everything. And I just think that's interesting because so often, even as adults, we don't want to feel like we're a burden. We don't want to put things on other people unduly. And so we tend to feel like we need to shoulder things ourselves. And while there's, of course, there's being a responsible adult, at the same time, we should be leaning on each other and we should be helping each other. And again, it's just the needing to be with people, and that is a healthy thing rather than being alone. And I just think it's a really interesting way to bring it across. Like, I thought I couldn't ask you to risk your life for me because that was like asking too much, but I can. And, of course she can't if Sasha doesn't want to. You can't force anybody to do something like that, but you can definitely ask them because it's about more than um, just you or just that's what they're saying. So I thought that was really interesting, and it just feeds into the alone theme. And then she says, I get that you're afraid. And Sasha says, I am. I am afraid. And Maggie says, yeah, but we can get there. And she says, okay, let's go get Bob and let's get there. So this is basically a mirror scene to Still, in that it's like because Maggie opened up to Sasha about what she went through, then Sasha was finally able to admit her own pain and talk about it and work through it, right? Bob couldn't get her to do that, but Maggie finally did. And I think it's just because Maggie talked about her own pain. And that makes people feel safer talking about theirs. And that is kind of what happened with Beth and Daryl. She just allowed him to talk about his pain because she talked about hers. And that helped him to open up. So you see how the parallels are going there. But again, Sasha's not paralleled to Daryl in this episode. She's paralleled to him in the previous episode. And Maggie to a certain extent, too. So then we go back to Daryl, and Joe Cramer shows up, and good old Len. Fun stuff. Don't have a whole lot more to say about this. Although, I do think this line is interesting. I've been looking for a weapon like that. I mean, the obvious thing is that he's talking about, like, he wants a bow for himself. But I feel like this is actually a statement about Daryl. Like, he's been looking for someone like Daryl to join the group or to use as a weapon in some way. Anyway, it's just a thought I had. And, we all know how it ends. It doesn't really work out one way or the other, but I thought that was an interesting line. And I think in a way, Bob, at the beginning of this, Bob saying it doesn't matter who you are is kind of a foreshadow of this too, because he says, come on, fella, suicide is stupid. Why hurt yourself when you can hurt other people? Daryl knew from the beginning because of that line that these were not good people, right? And he still stayed with them because he didn't want to be alone. And, when Bob said that to him and Glenn at the beginning, they were both kind of shocked and like, dude, like, what if we're terrible people? What do you mean it doesn't matter who we are? But it's just part of the theme that people don't want to be alone, right? And Daryl didn't want to be alone. And then Rick reiterates that in 416 when he says he understands. Daryl was saying, I'm sorry, I didn't know how bad they could be, basically. And Rick just says, I get it. You were alone. You didn't want to be alone. So again, it's part of the theme. And then the end of this is actually, I've always thought this scene was really cute when they catch up and he hugs Maggie and then he hugs Sasha. And one thing I will point out here, again, preaching to the choir, but when he hugs Maggie, it's really kind of funny. They're both smiling and it's kind of a joyful hug, but it's very different when he hugs Sasha. It's softer and it just feels a lot more intimate. And it's just, all I'm trying to say is it's very obvious who he has a romantic relationship with. And it's the same thing with Beth and Daryl in 401. The skeptics like to say that wasn't a romantic hug, but I think the reason they rail so hard against it is because they know very well that it was. That it's just very obvious when you hug someone what your relationship is to them. Okay, so I think that is all I have, just them walking away. Oh, and then we see Glenn finding the terminus sign. So, okay, in terms of something overall, so this is what I just want you to pay attention to with this, is that, as I said, the first one was about Beth and Daryl healing, and then we finally get into the romance part of it in this second episode. We see it in a lot of ways, and I actually forgot to mention, when we see him training her on the crossbow at the beginning, he does keep touching his face, which is, again, it's a proven psychological sign that a man is attracted to a woman when he touches his face like that, when he's looking at her. So they give us a lot of romantic signals here. And then, of course, there's the obvious things, the dinner and the and all of that. Meanwhile, you have Maggie and Sasha kind of going through the same thing. So it's like what am I trying to say? Reinforcing. There's the word I'm looking for. It's reinforcing this arc of healing. But we can extrapolate from that, because if Maggie and Sasha are being paralleled with Daryl in terms of the healing, and Bob is being paralleled with Beth, and Sasha and Bob are in a relationship, again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's almost proof that they were being set up by the writers as love interests, right? The other thing to notice is that, we could talk about how Maggie looking for Glenn is going to translate into Beth looking for Daryl, and I think that very well could be the case. Either you could see it in terms of the missing 17 days, since, like I said, the funeral home, I think, is probably a foreshadow of that, but also maybe later on, once he finds out she's alive, go searching for her. And the other thing, the main thing that I can really tie to the themes going on currently in Daryl Dixon season 3 is the fact that the romance really couldn't happen until after the healing happened. So I'll reiterate what I said before. It's not realistic to think that you can't be in a romantic relationship until you've healed 100% of your trauma. Like, that's just not realistic at all. But we're talking this really deep, heavy, been going on for years kind of trauma, right? That needed to be healed. Um, so we didn't see Beth and Daryl kiss or anything, of course, but I mean, think about it this way. Bob did kiss Sasha and she did not go with him. You would think if it were just about the romance that would have made her want to go with him. She didn't. Why? Because she hadn't worked through her trauma yet. So it could not be a viable relationship until that was worked through. And once it was, then she smiled, then she went with him. And the next episode, we really see the two of them interacting in. I mean, there's the Terminus stuff, but everybody's running and screaming during those episodes. But it's like in Strangers. And then we see them kissing more and flirting more and just like holding hands and being kind of giggly and all of that. But she had to heal her trauma first. And it's kind of the same thing with Beth and Daryl. That's why they did the healing first and really established that foundation of the two of them being able to trust each other and feel safe with each other. And then in Alone, then we started to see more of the romance, right? But that also is going to be true on a bigger or a larger scale, I guess. It ties to that line we saw at the beginning of Daryl Dixon 3 that said that you have to let go of your dead. And you can even see this with Carol because we see that she has let go of her dead. And what happened right after she let go of her dead? She started a romance with Antonio. Now, whether that romance ends up being long-term or not, the point is she couldn't really be in a romance again until she healed her trauma. Now, I don't think that her and Ezekiel, I don't think their romance was negative or unhealthy necessarily. I think she reached a point because she rescued Henry, which did help her heal from Sophia, at least somewhat, where she was able for a period of time to be present in that relationship. And it was a good relationship and it was a healthy relationship. But when she lost Henry again after that, she spiraled and went right back down into her trauma. And then that's why she left Ezekiel and couldn't sustain a relationship anymore. But then when we see her with Daryl and she finally did let go of all of the children, suddenly she's open to starting a relationship with Antonio. So you see the patterns here. And they very obviously told us that Daryl has not let go of his dead yet. Like she had that conversation with him where she said, I actually feel really happy and optimistic about the future. And he basically said, well, I'm happy for you, but I don't feel that way. Okay, until he feels that way, the romance is not going to happen. Okay, so it's going to come back to this. He needs to figure out a way to let go of his dead, and then Beth will come back into his life. And it has to be that way. That's the pattern that they're setting up here. Let's see. I wrote a few notes here. Still is about healing and being able to move forward in a healthy way. I went over alcohol as the crutch. And I mean, you could, I actually didn't even finish that. You could say that same pattern holds for Maggie and Glenn here. I mean, we already knew as the audience that Glenn was still alive because we'd already seen that, but we hadn't seen him in an episode or 2 or 3, however long it's been. But Maggie was also afraid to move forward, just like Sasha and Daryl were. And then once she healed that, she and Sasha helped each other heal. Then we see Glenn finding the terminus. So it was like Glenn couldn't show up again until she healed that, right? Again, just symbolically. I talked about in Still how there's the different meanings of still and how they had to be still in order to heal themselves. And what we see here is the opposite of that, or at least, I mean, Beth was being a little bit busy looking for alcohol, but both Sasha and Maggie are like being busy here. They're trying to keep moving. They're trying to keep themselves busy. They're trying to find something to go do. You know what I mean? And it's like with Maggie lying down with the walkers and then her and Sasha just stopping and talking. That was them being still so that they could really consider what was going on and they're not running from their feelings. They're actually facing them, all of that. So, I mean, it's just kind of interesting if you think about the titles that way. Still, yeah, it's the alcohol still, and that's a big symbol, but it's also being still in order to heal your trauma. And then here we have alone, that you shouldn't be alone. Like when you're traumatized, that's when they want to be alone. And when you heal that, then you're going to go searching for people. Okay, I think that's all my notes. So that is what I have for Alone. I hope that was helpful. And again, if there's anything I didn't cover, feel free to send it in as an ask. And yeah, I will just see you in the next video. Bye.